you in this crazy world. It's alright. Yeah, it's alright. How can I protect you when all the crowd are gone? Now your party's over and all this world is wrong. It's alright.
Ready? So one of the awesome things about being able to video our message every Sunday is that there are people from all around the world who actually watch our messages every week. And we don't have a huge following, but there are people who have never, ever been here to Cornerstone who are faithful, regular viewers, maybe more faithful than some of you guys, okay? I met a gal, was in Cambodia the first couple weeks of January, and I met this gal named Arlene. She's actually from Pittsburgh. And we bumped into each other and we became Facebook friends. We've been keeping in touch ever since. And she recently reached out to me to congratulate me about some of the transitions that are going on here. And here's what she said. There she is there. Hi, Arlene. Pastor Binder, I have listened to the Cornerstone podcast each week since we met in Cambodia. Congratulations for your new transition for you, your wife, and your church. I feel like a member of Cornerstone Boulder, even thousands of miles away. Isn't that cool? So big shout out to you, Arlene. I'm assuming you're going to see this because you say you watch every week. Okay. And there's another woman who actually ended up coming here a couple of months ago, and she had never been here, but she watches the videos on a weekly basis, and she came down for Connect at Cornerstone, introduced herself, and then just began to stare at me, kind of awkwardly, right? And so, sensing what was on her mind, I said, I know, I'm shorter than you imagined seeing me in those videos. And she kind of grinned and said, I'm sorry, but yes. So maybe you've all noticed I'm kind of on the short side. In my younger days, I think I topped out around 5'8", but age and gravity have taken its toll. And so I think I'm a couple inches smaller if we actually got a tape measure out. And honestly, being short, is, to me, is kind of a cruel joke that God has played on me, because I have had all my life a love for playing basketball, which is typically dominated by taller men and women. But my saving grace is that God made me fast. And so when I used to play basketball, I actually loved playing against taller people because they were easy to get around and then run down to the other side of the court. And because of my speed, when I was in middle school, I tried out for track. And I'll never forget that experience, because prior to that tryout, I never did anything, any running as a sport before. And so when the coach told me to run around the track 4 times, my goal was to show him how fast I could run a mile. And so coming around the first lap, he looks at his stopwatch and he goes, "You're doing great." He shouted, "Awesome time," when I came around the second time, and amazing on the third lap. But then I began to go anaerobic kind of quickly, and I had to stop to catch my breath. I puked my guts out. And so breaking the middle school world record would have to wait for another time. So indulge me. Speaking of breathing, let's do a little test. Just take a deep breath and just hold it for a little bit, okay? Ready? Okay, let it out. Did you notice, maybe you've noticed by now in your years of living, that you can't hold your breath indefinitely, right? God made us in such a way that without replenishing our air supply, we will die. And he did the same thing with things like food and water as well. Most people can typically only survive about 3 minutes without air, about 3 days without water, and about 3 weeks without food. And all 3 of these life-sustaining functions must continually enter into our bodies and then exit out of our bodies in various places if we want to remain alive. Whenever I take a group to Israel, which is usually yearly, my friend and Israeli tour guide, Hannah Ben Chaim, always points out the difference between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. Okay, so here's a little map, a little rendering. The headwaters of the Jordan River are just up there, just around Syria. They come down, they feed into the Sea of Galilee, and it keeps going to the Dead Sea. The Sea of Galilee is teeming with life because it has an entry point and it has an exit point. But the Dead Sea is dead and salty because it has no exit point. And so we can see from these examples in nature that God built into the world a law that for something to be fully alive, there must be a healthy cycle of receiving in and then giving out. And that is even truer for us human beings. In order for us to be fully alive, we need to have a healthy cycle of receiving in and giving out, caring for ourselves and then caring for others. We learned last week that we can be so self-centered and so self-focused on our own needs that we can become crazy selfish. That was the message last week. That model only takes in and is not sustainable. But on the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, remember I promised this week we would talk about the other end, we can be so neglectful and so inattentive to our own needs that we become crazy careless. That model only gives out. It is also not sustainable. Crazy careless is the title of today's message. And we're going to look at how to establish a healthy, sustainable, circular model of receiving in and giving out, of caring for ourselves and then caring for others. Many of us living here in the Boulder area, we're already pretty attentive to our self-care. So this may at first seem like I'm kind of preaching to the choir, but as we dig into this topic from a biblical perspective, I'm sure that at the very least, you're going to find this message really interesting and at the very most, really helpful for you or for someone else who might need to hear it. Okay, so let's begin by looking at America's health report card. And unfortunately, it's not good. Someone told me that as a country, as a nation, we spend the most money on healthcare than any other nation, and we're ranked 17 as far as our health care. Okay, so most of the statistics that I'm about to read to you are on the rise, and they're rising rapidly. Here they are, okay? Cancer is the leading cause of death in America, topping out around 7.6 million deaths each year. So that doesn't tell us how many people have cancer that are either fighting it or beat it. Heart disease is the second leading cause of death, 610,000 people dying from heart disease each year. COPD, which is a lung problem, respiratory problem, is the third leading cause of death in the United States. 800,000 people suffer a stroke here every year. 140,000 of that group don't survive that stroke. 1 in 10 people over the age of 65, that's me, right, have Alzheimer's. 34% of all adults in America are overweight. Another 35% are in the obese category. And 1 in 8 adults have type 2 diabetes. That's largely due to these kind of poor eating habits that bring that on. 50 million Americans now suffer from serious autoimmune disorders, and that's really on the rise. 40 million suffer from anxiety disorders, panic attacks, fear, those kinds of things. And 1 in every 3 Americans suffers from hypertension. That's high blood pressure. And so sadly, if you look at this list, most, not all, but most everything on this list is preventable. So I give America a gracious C- on its health report card, and I think that's being really kind here, okay? Some of these statistics are driven by poor eating habits, by overindulging in alcohol, smoking cigarettes, a lack of good stress management, inability to set healthy boundaries, no regular exercise program. Some are driven by environmental problems like toxins and pollutants in our food and air and water supply. You know, for a long time now in our history, heavy concentrations of pesticides have been used in growing our fruits and our vegetables. Antibiotics and hormones are injected and used in our animal food products. We have tons of pollutants that are pumped into our air and our water. And as followers of Yeshua, the question is, what should be our response to all this crazy carelessness? How would God want us to live in light of statistics like these? So let's begin by looking at what I call the theology of self-love, okay? I went to Talbot Theological Seminary. It's on the West Coast. It's part of Biola University, and that was back in the early 80s. I was a really young believer. I came to faith in 1981, and is that right? Yeah, that is right. And really, I'm in seminary like by 84, so I'm still a really young believer. And I can vividly remember this. Okay, I remember one of my professors teaching that self-love is not found in the Bible, and that it's one of the most dangerous heresies in Christianity, leading people to be self-absorbed and self-centered. By the way, I would agree with him. Being self-absorbed and self-centered is not good, all right? He said that the Bible does not teach that we should love ourselves. The Bible teaches that we should die to ourselves. He's correct, at least on the second point. The self, he said, is evil, and it must not be nurtured. It must be put to death. And to bolster up his biblical evidence, he said Jesus was 100% selfless. He came to earth as a servant in the lowest form of a human being. Every day, day in and day out, he lived his life. He poured himself out for the sake of others, and in the end, he even gave that life up for our sake. That was kind of his argument. Now, most of you know that I like to think of myself as a deep digger of truth, and I just don't accept cheap theological answers to complex life questions. I'm not the just go have a quiet time and everything will be okay kind of pastor. I'm not someone who says to serious life challenges, well, you know, God's good, just move on. Okay, I'm not wired that way. I like to challenge. I like to think deep. And so I think for the most part, you all appreciate that about me. I mean, it kind of shows when I come here and dump on you for 35 minutes. And so as I sat there and I listened to this professor lay out his argument, the cheap truth alarm began going off in my head big time. And so I raised my hand and I said, "Excuse me, professor." And I wanted to get it right, okay? So I said, "So you're saying that Jesus just gave and gave and gave and gave for our sake until he finally gave up his life on the cross for our sake, and that we should model our lives after him?" And he said, "Good job, Gene. You got it." Okay. But you all know I didn't leave it there, right? Okay. He was just about to move on when I said, "So, Jesus never ate, and Jesus never drank water, and Jesus never slept. He never spent nurturing time with the Father because he was just too busy giving his life away." And the professor said, "Well, of course, he did those things." And so I said, "Well, that sounds to me like self-love." And not wanting to be confused by the facts, he said, once again, "The self is evil. It needs to die." And then I said, "Could it be that the self needs both to be loved and to die? And that these two theologies are not in conflict with each other because they're two separate streams of thought?" And then he went all cross-eyed on me. And he said, "We're getting way off track here. Let's move on, shall we?" Okay. So Jesus was once asked, "What's the greatest commandment in the Torah?" And his answer was this: "Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as what? Yourself. He's quoting from two separate commandments in the Torah. Loving God comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6. Loving others comes from Leviticus chapter 19. But as deep diggers of the truth, we should be asking ourselves the important question, why not simply say, love God and love others? Why add these qualifiers to the two commandments? We are to love God with all of our heart and soul and mind and strength, and we're to love others as we love ourselves. Now, I'll answer why a qualifier is important to loving God in the next point, but the answer to why a qualifier is important for loving others takes us back to this law of receiving in and giving out that we talked about just a moment ago. There's this cause and effect in play here when it comes to loving others as we love ourselves. How we love ourselves is how we're going to love others, which means that if we don't take care of ourselves well, we're probably not going to take care of others well either. If you read Leviticus chapter 19, you're going to find it's mostly a list of how to treat others. Leave the edges of your field for the poor. Don't steal. Don't lie or deceive. Don't give false witness or profane. Don't show partiality. Don't judge unfairly. Don't seek revenge or bear a grudge. Don't endanger anyone. Don't hate anyone. And then the section simply ends in verse 18 saying, but, meaning instead of doing all those unloving things, love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, we should be loving and respecting others the same way that we should be loving and respecting ourselves. We need to care for ourselves well so that we can care for others well. And notice that there's an order and a priority to this commandment. Step 1, we love ourselves well. Step 2, we love others well. Step 3, repeat step 1. Over and over and over. Isn't this, think about this. Isn't this the principle behind the airline instructions on oxygen masks? Isn't it? In case of an emergency, oxygen mask will drop down in front of you. Please pull the mask down over your head, over your face. Place the mask over your mouth and nose. If you're traveling with a child, please attend to yourself first, then the child. Why is this order and priority necessary? Because a suffocating parent is less likely to be in a position to assist his suffocating child. The same order and priority is true when it comes to loving others. First, care for ourselves well, so that you'll be able to care for others well. As a human, this is how Jesus lived his life, and this is how we should live our life as well. Here are some of the ways Jesus took care of himself. Here's just some examples. Number 1, he ate wild-caught, fresh omega-3 fish, didn't he? No farm-raised fish for this guy. I don't know. He walked everywhere he went, reducing his carbon footprint by never driving a car. I haven't found one example of Jesus driving a car. In fact, the only time we see Jesus taking any kind of public transportation is when he rode on a donkey in Jerusalem to fulfill biblical prophecy. That's it. Other than that, he's always walking. Jesus often snuck away to refresh his soul with some quality time with his Father, with God. And didn't he refresh his body when he took a nap in the boat in the middle of a storm? Huh? Was that just to illustrate something for the disciples on faith, or was he really catching some Z's? Okay, I added some humor because the obvious point I'm trying to make is that Jesus received in so that he could give out. Philippians 2, 4-5 says it this way: each of you should look not only to your own interests. The Bible presumes self-care. Each of us should look not only to our own interests, but also to the interests of others. You've got to take in and you got to give out. Your attitude, it says, should be the same as that of Messiah Jesus. Then it gives all these incredible, humble, sacrificial qualities that Jesus had. Here's another breathing experiment, okay? This is the opposite. Now I want you to take a deep breath and just blow it out. Just keep blowing it out. So deep breath. No, breathe it out. Notice how you can't breathe out very long? Okay? It's the same principle here. It teaches us that we can't just give and give and give and give because we won't last long that way. In order to keep giving out, we have to keep taking in. My Talbot professor confused self-love with selfishness. They're different. Selfishness is not a sustainable model, and it doesn't bring life. Self-love, however, is a sustainable model, and it brings life to ourselves and to the people that we end up loving on. Remember, in order to be fully alive, we can't just take in, that's crazy selfish. That was the message last week. We can't just give out, that's crazy careless. That's what we're talking about today. In order to be fully alive, there has to be a circular order and priority. We have to take in and we have to give out. We have to love ourselves and we have to love our neighbors. Is that making any sense to anybody? All right. Okay, so what does this look like? The answer to that question is found in something I call the fullness of self, okay? Not to be confused with being full of ourselves. Those are two different topics. Remember that Deuteronomy passage, love the Lord your God, and then it adds these qualifiers with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. This chapter is about loving God by obeying all of his commandments. And so these qualifiers are basically saying, love and obey God with every part of yourselves, not just with your heart, not just with your soul, not just with your strength. Love God with every part of your being. I love this quote. This guy is Pastor Kirk Winslow of Canvas Church in Irvine, California. And he says it this way. It is as though God is saying, you shall love me with all of your willpower, with all of your passion, with all of your behavior, with all of your money, with all of your work, with all of your devotion to your family, with all of your prayers, with all of your singing, with all of your artwork, with all of your philosophy, with all of your travel, and with all of your gardening, even the kitchen sink. I like it. Now, when Jesus quotes this commandment, in the Gospels, in Mark chapter 12, verse 30, he adds loving God with all of our minds to the list. And he can do that. Well, number one, he's God. He can do whatever he wants, right? But he can do that because this list is not intended for us to divide humans into a collection of separate theological parts as a lot of people do. Well, I'm a trichotomist, we're three parts. Well, I'm a bichotomist, we're two, That's not what this is intended to do. They're listed here to show that there are multiple dimensions to being a human being. But what's important is that we function as a fully integrated whole. Simply put, we're supposed to love God with the fullness of ourselves, with our entire being. And I believe that's how we should think of ourselves when we contemplate what it looks like to love ourselves. We should love the fullness of ourselves, not just some selected parts of ourselves. Some of us give lots of attention to nourishing our minds and little attention to nourishing our bodies. Some of us throw a lot of energy into physical exercising and little energy into spiritual exercising. Some of us are good at being creative and adventurous, but not so good at being structured and organized. We are multidimensional, and when we consider a self-care plan, we should consider putting into place a comprehensive self-care plan that addresses the fullness of who we are. Let me give you a few suggestions from what this looks like in my life, in Andrea's life. When it comes to food, You knew that'd be top on my list, right? We eat organic food whenever possible. Can't always do that, but we'll choose a restaurant that serves organic. We buy food at grocery markets that sell organic. We eat fish and chicken that's antibiotic and hormone-free. We rarely eat red meat. We both have a fitness program, looks very different from each other, that manages stress and helps our body stay healthy. We take supplements to address some medical issues and ever-growing aging issues. We spend daily time with God, reading, studying the scriptures, praying, and worshiping. My wife is an incredible worshiper. I mean, it's like all day for her. Over the years, we've sought out counseling multiple times to resolve our personal issues, our couple issues, our past wounds, our conflicts. We're always working on personal transformation, reading something, watching something, going to something. We are not the same people we were when we got married 43 years ago. We're not the same people we were last year. We practice Shabbat the best we can. We have friends and family over. We barbecue. We slow things down. We make this time different from the rest of the week as best we can, as best as what's practical. And we do all these things not to be self-centered, but to be other-centered. Andrew and I have a very different output capacity, but one thing for sure is that neither of us would have any output capacity if we didn't take time to focus on our input. We receive so that we can give. Didn't Jesus say, freely, freely you have received, now freely what? Give. It's that principle that's in play. This is God's spiritual law that he built into the universe. We want to be, Andrew and I want to be fully alive. We want to be like the Sea of Galilee, not fully dead like the Dead Sea. What about you? What's it look like in your life? Have you thought about this? I mean, do you have a comprehensive plan that addresses the fullness of who you are? You know, it's interesting. In Colossians chapter 2, verse 10, it says, in Messiah, in Yeshua, you have been brought to fullness. And the worship team can come up now. In Messiah, you have been brought to fullness. So that means we were kind of separated a little bit, right? I mean, I hate this phrase, but a lot of times people will come up to me and say, you're Jewish. Oh, and you believe in Jesus. Oh, you're a completed Jew. And I hate that because it's like, well, what were you? You know? I mean, we're all incomplete. We're all fragmented outside of the Lord. And so part of what it means to be a person of faith is to be reconnected to ourselves. We lose part of who we are, whether it's emotionally, physically, spiritually. And I find it interesting, like in the world of psychology, this is a big deal for people to be fragmented. You know, when somebody has like a dissociative kind of disorder, or they have multiple personalities, they have split off, they have fragmented. And part of the therapy involved in helping a person like that is to get them get all those parts integrated once again. And so as you think about moving forward with something like this, and I think it's a big deal, I think we should be leading the charge in the world for this stuff. When you think about a comprehensive plan for yourself, think about all the parts of who you are, how to integrate them together. And let's be as much as we can be for the sake of others. That's biblical self-love right there. I know I embarrassed Aaron earlier because Aaron's dropped quite a bit of weight. Look how svelte he looks, right? And it felt a little bit more like, it switched at that moment to a motivational talk, like the power of positive thinking.
I just thumped the weight off.
But we have all kinds of great people here at Cornerstone who are working in this kind of field. We have physical trainers, we have nutritionists, we have chiropractors, we have yoga instructors. If you're like in that field, stand up for a second, will you? Anybody here that's in that field? Come on, this is a good plug. 1, 2, okay. What do you do? Awesome. All right. So you have some openings? Okay, just a few. You see where she's sitting. What's your name? I can't see that far. Callie. Kirsten. I can see you in the light. Okay. Nutrition. Nobody needs that. We've got some, we had like a dozen people in first service. I don't know. See, they're healthy. They get up early. But we also, we always have something that we're offering here at Cornerstone. I know that coming up in the fall, Mary Howard, who's on staff and is a licensed psychologist, is going to do a class on the mindful Christian. A lot of science these days where they're finding out that the being present, being, all of yourself, all there, right now, which is biblical, right? God says today, not tomorrow, not yesterday, today, if you hear my voice. Don't worry about tomorrow. There's always this moment stuff that you find in Scripture. There's a lot of science that's helping, particularly with anxiety stuff and racing thoughts in your mind where you can't get your mind to settle down. So she's going to look at it from a Christian perspective, this mindfulness topic. That's going to come up in the fall. And also I know that Aaron's wife, Destry, is going to be leading another healing care series. This will be 5 weeks, kind of a prep for a longer class. So look for those. We have all kinds of things for you to invest in this topic. For right now, though, let's just, if we can get the house lights down and you all stand up. Be thinking about this thing of being fully integrated, and as we enter into this last time of worship, what does it mean to be all in to worship? I guess the way I could break this down, some of us might just be glued into the words, so our mind is engaged. Some of us are more into I just love this, and so it's more the emotions. Others might just be putting their hands, and it's more of a body thing, or going down to the floor type of thing. Be fully integrated here in this worship. Give it a good practice, even now, as we spend about 10 minutes or so praising God for who He is. So, Father, help us. Help us get this. And not that we could become selfish or self-centered, but that we can offer, that we can have more to offer. The people in our sphere of influence who need to be loved on. And I pray, Father, that we as a congregation, as a family, would be leading the charge in this. I know we come in all shapes and sizes, and it's not about that, Lord. It's just about doing the best that we can do to get the most out of this life for your glory. And I pray you'd help us do that, Lord. I pray in Yeshua's name.